let's talk about Time's Arrow, which, as I said, is, I think, basically the second half or the sequel to The Old Sugarman Place. This episode, of course, is named Time's Arrow, which directly picks up on Bojack's comment about Time's Arrow at the end of the last episode, and we'll come back to that significance in a bit. In this episode, which I find very moving, we see how things look from inside Beatrice's perspective during her dementia. And we also get her story in flashbacks. We saw her as a very young kid in Old Sugarman Place, and here we see her as a teenager and as a young woman. We see her relationship to her father. We see her meeting Bojack's father and the early stages of her marriage. So we really learn a lot more of her backstory. But I think the most innovative part of this episode is showing how things look from inside her perspective as somebody suffering from dementia, which is just not a perspective that we see represented in media very often at all. So remember, at the end of Old Sugarman Place, Bojack says, in response to the question of why he did all of this, rebuilding the house, he says, I don't know, I guess it was just a big waste of time, but you can't change the past. Time's Arrow marches on, but you can't change the past. So this episode, which is called Time's Arrow, returns directly to this claim, and it asks, through narrative, this philosophical question about whether you can change the past. Beatrice moves back and forth between past and present throughout this entire episode. And as she's losing her grip on the present, the past is coming back for her, and it is inhabiting and haunting the present. And it's folding on top of the present in various ways. So, for example, she sees Henrietta's face. Well, no, not Henrietta's face. Henrietta's body minus the face imposed on top of Bojack. So time in this episode certainly doesn't work just in one direction. We're bouncing back and forth between times and across times and folding times onto one another, just as we did in Old Sugarman, perhaps even more so here. If you think about it, TV shows and movies and novels and any kind of fiction pretty routinely does this moving back and forth across time. Maybe not as extremely as Bojack, which is doing it in this very creative, intense way, but going back and forth to events in the past and events in the present and thinking about how they're related to one another is a standard fictional technique. And that is how we tell narrative. So in a sense, we all already know this deep truth that narrative form does not move linearly through time. Narrative form, narratives that make sense to us, move around through time. And if you were to tell a narrative and you were just to sort of click through in order of time, and then I woke up, and then I ate breakfast, and then I got dressed, and then I brushed my teeth, and then I went out the door, you'd have something that was just a lineup of events. It wouldn't organize itself into a narrative. Part of the way that we make narratives is by pulling things from the past and the future and the present and setting them against one another. So our understanding of the present is always complexly infected by the past, and the past keeps showing back up. And since narrative is how we basically understand what's going on around us, it's just not true that from our perspective, we move forward unidirectionally through time. Time does not have a single straight arrow in terms of how we experience the world, even if that's true from the point of view of physics, say. So we should not assume that there is a single arrow of that kind. There may be a complicated, tied on top of itself arrow. Okay, so at the same time though, and I said this when we were talking about Old Sugarman Place too, there is another sense in which the episode really does reaffirm what Bojack says, that you can't change the past and time marches on, which is that we do see here how Beatrice's past shaped her and isn't going away, right? That past will always be something that is her past, and that helps determine how she relates to people and the decisions she makes and the kind of person that she is.